Hello and welcome to day 3, where you'll learn the rules in chess. Now, some of those chess rules are very confusing, so if you're having trouble on a particular rule, just make sure to rewatch the video over and over until you fully understand it. And let's go. First, starting with the easiest ones and slowly working into the hardest ones. So, let's talk about promotion, something that is very important. So this is white to move. What happens if the pawn reaches to the end of the row for like this? So as we come back, well, basically, let me just show you. So what promotion is you can transform it into any piece. The pawn at the end of the board can transform into any piece, except for the king, obviously. And you can't transform into a pawn, otherwise that's be useless. The only thing a pawn can transform during promotion is a queen, rook, knight, or bishop. That's only 4 options, and as you can see, I chose the queen, and yeah. And it's the same thing for black, as I show you. So this is black to move. Um, white did poorly. You know, black has reached to the end of the row, right? The pawn is now on this row, because in black's perspective, like this is like the end. I'll even flip the board so that you can see this is black's perspective, and the pawn just reached here. So as I flip the board, same thing. Queen, rook, knight, bishop. Let's say the black player wants to make it into a rook. So yeah, that's basically how promotion works. So let's start off with the next rule. Um, let's start on en passant. Now, this is confusing. I get it. It's very confusing. But it's something that you have to know. So black just did this. Alright, moves 2 squares. It's okay. So white has the option of taking like this. This pawn's gone, and now you just captured like a normal pawn move. But the funny thing is, it's not a normal capture because this pawn isn't right here, but he can still capture it because of a rule called en passant. And what en passant is if a pawn moves 2 squares and a pawn is side by side with each other, then you can take on en passant. And let me show you what is non en passant. So if I go here, 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 you can't take on en passant. The only reason you can take on en passant is if like black moves 2 squares forward. As you can see, it just moves 1 square and 1 square forward. That doesn't count as en passant. So as I continue, I want to show you another very important thing. So let's say I do create like another move. Let's say I move my king, black moves his king. I can't take on en passant. And the reason why is because whenever like your opponent moves on like 2 squares forward and is like, side by side, you have the option of taking on en passant. However, if you like do another move, then you can't take it. So whenever you have the chance of en passant, you can either take it or just leave it here and not take it by en passant. So that's something that's very important to remember. I'm not sure about you guys, but in my experience, I have known many people who I play when I was like a beginner who do not know what en passant is and either go crazy thinking I'm cheating or like they're just confused, which is normal because it's a very odd rule. However, if you have like an opponent that's confused, thinks you're cheating, thinks it's not a rule in chess, I tell them it's a rule in chess, and I tell them to Google en passant. Anyways, let's go to the next one, castling. This one's very important to remember, so pay attention. Let's just move this one here, 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 here. So as you can see, this king is on its like square, this rooks are like properly placed. So I'm gonna show you what en passant is. So as I move like here, I'm just creating random moves. Wait, sorry, something's not working. So as I create like random moves, for example, this is called castling. And this is when you can castle kingside. Black can also do it too. Let me just show you a couple moves. This is known as the Kingside Castle. And what it does is you move your king 2 squares. Yeah, I know it's very odd because normally the king moves 1 square. But in this one, there's a rule called castle where your king can move 2 squares and the rook moves 2 squares. And the reason why you want a castle is, the king's protected by like those pawns, and you know, the rook can sometimes join in the game later on. I'm just saying that because castling is very important in chess, especially in the early stages of the chess match. So let me show you another way. You don't always have to do like this. You can also do something like, let me just clear the board, for example. Let me just oh, that's why. Okay. So let me just enable something. All right. So white can queenside castle like this. This is known as a queenside castle, also known as the long castle. Whatever you call it is fine, but the king moves 2 squares and the rook moves 3 squares, like this. Now, there are some exceptions to when you can kingside castle or when you can queenside castle. Well, technically. So let's say, let me just do some random. So let's say black does this. Like, notice how I can't kingside castle. And the reason why is black has control of this square. Black's rook is controlling this square right here. And you can't castle because, you'll castle into a check, which is an illegal move. So coming back, what happens if I move this rook right over here? You still can't castle. And the reason why is because if you castled right now, yeah, if you castled, you get castled into a check. So yeah, that's something important to remember. Also, if black takes like this, if you're in check, well, I should have said this, but check is when, well, this is a perfect time to explain, but check is when your king is being attacked by a piece or is being threatened to be captured. Notice how you can't castle. And this is important because you can't castle when you're in check, because this rook is checking the king's in danger, it's being threatened to be captured, so you can't castle in check. Also, if I do something like this, if I move my king, for example, and I go back to my original square, let's say, I don't think black would do this, but notice how you can't castle. You can't castle kingside, you can't castle queenside, you can't long, short castle. And the reason why is you moved your king. And if you moved your king, even like this, as you've seen it, even if you go back to the original square, you still can't castle. So if you moved your king, you can't castle on either side, just to be aware of. And also, if I do something like this, here, and then black does a random move, notice how I can't castle kingside. And the reason why, this rook to move. If this rook move, then I can castle on this side. But if this rook move already, then I can't castle queenside. However, this rook hasn't moved, so I can castle queenside like this. And notice the rook's checking the black king. As you can see, the white rook, sorry, the white rook is threatening to capture black's king. So anyways, cool. And it's also important to note that let's say black does this. Black has control of this square right here. Can you still queenside castle? The answer is yes, you can queenside castle. And the reason why is, one, like, if this rook were to be right here, it would have control over this square, which obviously you cannot, because you would castle into check. This, you can't, because you would castle because when you castle, you'll get checked. And notice how you can castle even if your opponent has occupied the square. And the reason why is even though like this square like oh there must be two spaces in order to, and there's like probably this one. No. So if like a rook, because you know rooks move three squares, people are like thinking, oh, like the rook, you can't castle queenside because the rook will be like, you know, no. So just make sure that if you're castling queenside, make sure those two squares aren't occupied by the by your opponent, and if you're castling kingside, make sure those two squares are not occupied the by your opponent as well. So I know it's pretty obvious, but I'm still gonna show it to you. What happens if I put a knight here? So for this example, I'm showing kingside castle. So white can't castle kingside. It won't allow me. The reason why? This knight's in the way. So this knight's in the way, and the reason why is those two squares have to be completed. Those two squares have to be emptied out in order to castle. Otherwise, you can't. Like right now, those two squares are, open. So now white can castle. I forgot to enable castling allowed, but as you can see, so what if I just did the same? I cleared the board like queenside castle. Let's say this queen's right here. It's white to move. Notice how I forgot to enable it on. So as you can see, as I set up this board, you'll notice something strange about this. So this is black to move, right? Here, white cannot castle queenside. And the reason why is this queen is in the way. For queenside castle, those three squares need to be empty. So if I go here, here, now I can queenside castle. So just remember, if you want to castle kingside, make sure those two squares, I don't know why this is in the way, make sure those two squares are emptied out, not occupied by by your opponent. And yeah, you can castle kingside, but for like long castle, make sure those three squares are emptied out before you can castle queenside, just like in this example. So yeah, this is generally how how castling works. So yeah, let's move on to the next one, check. Now I've described it before, but I'm gonna show you, like, you know what check is, because like earlier on in this video, I told you that check is like attacking your king. Your king's being threatened of being captured. But I need to tell you the three ways you can get out of check. So let's say you are black. I'll flip the board. So let's say you are black right here. Your king is in check. There are three ways to get out of check. Number one is to move out the way. That way white can't check you anymore. Well, technically for now, but white can't capture your king as of now. Number two is just blocking it. And the reason why it's not a check anymore is because this piece is in the way of white's queen in this example. And finally, last one, check is to capture it, and like to capture the piece that's checking your king. And as you've noticed, this king is now in check, right? Because the black queen captured the white queen, and is threatening to take the king. So obviously white can move away, but white can also take the queen by capturing it, so it's no longer a check. So let's talk about checkmate, which is extremely important, and after that I'll talk about stalemate. So I'm going to use this same position to demonstrate what a checkmate is. So this is a checkmate. What determines a checkmate? So a checkmate is determined by one, this this king is in check, threatening to be captured. And number two, this king has no legal squares to go. You can't go over here, 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 or here, because this two squares are guarded by my queen. This square is also guarded by my queen. This square you can't because my king and queen occupy this, and you can't capture it because my king is protecting it. So generally, so as a review, one, it's in check, and two, it has no legal squares to go. So let me show you another one. Whoops, I accidentally resetted the board. So let me show you another checkmate. So this is a checkmate. The reason why, it's in check, right? White queen's threatening to take it. You can't go here because my queen occupies this. You can't go here and here because my king occupied those two squares. So that's a checkmate. And it's important to note, let me just do the same exact position, but let's say I have a like rook over here. So this is white to move. This is not a checkmate. Now, yes, the king is in check, no legal squares to go, but notice how the rook can capture the queen. It's a check. So like the rook can capture the queen, and that's something to keep in mind because, the captures, that's one way of escaping out of check. So just be careful on that because, well, it might seem like checkmate, it's not. So, well, that's something to consider, but that's how checkmate is. Let's talk about stalemate because with the exact same position with white to move, now this is a stalemate. And I know many of you guys are like, but like the black king has no legal squares to go. Yeah, that's true. However, this king is not in check. The main difference between checkmate and stalemate is that checkmate has, like, the king has no legal moves, but is also in check, while as stalemate has no legal moves, but this king is not in check. So that's basically the main difference. I also want to reset the board. Let's include a pawn in this example. This is not stalemate. Sure, it follows our rules. It's not in check. It's no legal squares to go. But look at this pawn right over here. Why don't the pawn can move? So right here, and it can promote, which you saw earlier about promotion. So the reason why this isn't a stalemate, well, this reason is not a stalemate, is because true that the king is not in check, no legal squares, but if your opponent's other pieces can move, then it's not considered a stalemate. So that's one big thing. So for example, let me just show you another again. Let me just flip the board and do something like this, this, a pawn, and a pawn. All right. So this is white to move. This is a stalemate. Follows our thing. No legal moves. It's not in check. But notice how this pawn can't move. The other pieces can't move. Like in this instance, this pawn can't move. Why? It's blocked by the pawn. Now, if this pawn was, for example, right here, then yes, this pawn can move. It's not considered stalemate because, the pawn can move. But in this case, the pawn has no legal moves. It can't move. And if you remember, this pawn cannot capture vertically. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, make sure you review the second video on how pieces move. So yeah, this is how stalemate is. Now let's talk about how you can win in chess and how you can lose in chess, and also how you can draw. So there are 3 ways you can win in chess. Number 1 is if you checkmate the opponent. Number 2 is your opponent resigns. And what resigning is like your opponent's way of saying, hey, I quit. I don't think this is winnable for me, so you get the win. And the number 3 is if your opponent's time runs out. So let's talk about how you can lose. Number one is if you get checkmated, obviously. Number two is if you resign. And number three is if your time runs out. So this is basically generally how you can win or lose. Now let's talk about drawing. Now there are many ways to draw, which is crazy. So let's go on one-on-one. The easiest way you can draw is if you and your opponent agree to a draw. So let's say you offer a draw or your opponent offers a draw. If you or your opponent agrees to it, then it's a draw. No one wins, no one loses, it's a draw. Number two is the threefold repetition is when like you get the same thing same position 3 times in a row. Like for example, let me just show you something weird. Let's just say I do something like this. Well, here, 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 and it's a draw. And the reason why is we've repeated this position 3 times. Like, have you like seen like the king go up and down, like repeating over and over and over for like 3 times? So that's how the threefold repetition rule is. That would be considered a draw. So make sure you understand that. Um, Number three is um, insufficient material. And what I'm talking about is like, this is white to move, but this is a draw. This is a dead draw. And the reason why is insufficient material. What insufficient material when you've drawn is like there's not enough material that you can checkmate the king. So like for example, a lone king and lone king cannot checkmate each other. There's absolutely no way. So that's why it's considered a draw. And another thing you can draw is time versus insufficient material. So let's just talk about that. This. Um, so let's say you are white, okay? You have a queen, you have a king, and this, like, your opponent's about to lose. But suddenly you ran out of time. Now, I know, as I said, that if you run out of time, you lose, but this is very different because, you know, yeah, sure, you've ran out of time, but there's no way no way black can checkmate you. There's just absolutely no way he can checkmate you. So that's what draw, like time versus insufficient material is. That's basically the general idea, but I wouldn't um I wouldn't care about it at all because it's highly unlikely that's gonna happen to you. So let's talk about the last one, which is the 50 move rule. And this is very confusing as well. So the 50 move rule is if you and your opponent hadn't made any captures in the past 50 moves, or none of you had made a pawn move in the last 50 moves. That would be considered the 50 move rule. So yeah, this is basically a draw. And I think that's it on the rules in chess. So you can click on this video to go to the next video, or you can click here to view the entire playlist, and I'll see you in the next video.